Hi, this is PlanStrongerTV. I'm your host, David Holland. On today's program, we're going to talk with Ormond Beach, Florida attorney Wendy Mara about guardianships. The special designation allows someone to act on somebody else's behalf when they're incapacitated. Be sure to stick around. Welcome back. Guardianships. It's a complicated subject. Thank God I've got Wendy Mara, Ormond Beach attorney, in the studio to help me talk with you about it. But here's a quick overview of what I want to share with you about guardianships. Does everybody need them? Are they needed in everybody's situation? Is it something you plan for? Depends on the circumstances, but the essence of a guardianship is when somebody is given legal authority over somebody else, and somebody is giving up the right to make their own decisions. So your ability to make choices for yourself because you don't have mental capacity. And the court has to approve this. So it's something that requires legal process. It is brought before a court. It's something where there has to be certain things done. And it's usually when the person doesn't want to give up their own authority. If everybody is good, if the person says, I can't handle things anymore, I can't make decisions, all of those things, then it's not as much of an issue. It's usually, though, when somebody needs to have their own authority or control taken away from them for their own good and for the good of other people who may be being affected by their incapacity. So it's a subject that is important to discuss with an attorney and to consider as part of your overall circumstance. And this is something that not only is important to talk about for your specific situation and how that may affect what's appropriate, but it also varies by state. This is something that is structured based on the rules or the laws in each state. So depending on where you live, that can affect the way these things are set up. So again, we have a great attorney in the studio to help us dig through this. So let's go ahead and get to it and talk through what needs to be done. Welcome back. So today we're going to dig into a very important subject, estate planning. Wow, it's a lot. There's a lot of different parts to estate planning, and it just depends on your circumstances, what's appropriate for you. Couple of disclaimers and caveats, no legal advice. But we are going to be talking with an attorney. So lucky us, I'm very pleased to bring to the program Wendy Mara. Wendy, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you again. So a couple additional disclaimers for our audience. Wendy and I have done work together. We have mutual clients. And her husband also works with me. And so we have a good relationship. And I wanted Wendy to come on and talk with us about some specific areas of estate planning and related documents and certain types of special, I guess that's one of the key words, some special documents that we want to talk about. So a little bit about your background, Wendy, before we dive into the topic. So you have an MBA?
I do.
And a law degree?
I do.
And I understand you were recently recognized, and you'll have to help me with the Martindale
Martindale-Hubbell has a rating system where peers rate each other. And I'm happy to say that I have become AV rated, which is
like a big deal.
Really, it's a big deal.
Okay.
It's an honor.
Congratulations.
And thank you.
I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, because Wendy wouldn't tell you. I'm telling you. Okay. So, and Wendy's office is right across the street from mine, so we've done some work together. So, I'm glad to have you come and talk to us, Wendy, because one of the things that I think a lot of times people get twisted up on when it comes to estate planning is it's one size fits all. It's generic, you just need X, Y, and Z, and that's it. But as you know, there are certain things that are very, very specialized. And so we're going to talk about a couple subjects I'd like to invite you to share with the viewers that in the area of estate planning and with people's estate and also their person, their own selves, that there are certain documents and certain things that need to be done to make sure things get done correctly. I'm kind of giving you that as a softball to help me explain it better to the audience. But so talk a little bit about some of those areas. And also one more thing for our viewers that I know that you are focused on Florida. That's
yes.
and there are, because this program may be viewed in other states, the laws are different and vary by state, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Very state specific, so
All
that's
right.
important. So if you are moving to Florida from another state, and I see this quite a bit in my practice, you do want to make sure that you have an attorney review your documents to make sure that whatever documents that you have are going to work well for you in the state of Florida. So that is important, that seeing as you brought that up, I figured I'd throw
Good.
that in there.
Good.
The basic documents that you're looking at when you are doing your estate planning, either a will or a trust, or it may be both. If you have a trust, you want to pour over a will so that anything you forgot to put into a trust is poured into it in the event, at the point where you are deceased. And those take care of your things, and a durable power of attorney takes care of your things so that somebody can make financial decisions for you if you are unable to, or you just don't want to anymore. It's not just if you are incapacitated. So those take care of your things. The other documents, which to me are very important, are those documents that take care of your person.
Your person.
And so basic healthcare surrogate, if you are incapacitated and unable to make healthcare decisions, you want to appoint somebody who is going to make the same decisions you would make. So it's important you choose carefully. You choose somebody who you know is going to honor your wishes. The most recent healthcare surrogate forms also allow for somebody to make healthcare decisions while you still have capacity. Okay. And there are some older people who go to the doctors and they're overwhelmed with everything the doctor tells them and don't want to make those decisions. They're unsure of those decisions. So some people will allow somebody to make decisions even when they are not incapacitated, but that's a little rare. Yeah. HIPAA releases so that people can obtain your health care information is very important. I also do a pre-need guardian.
This is the key one I want to make sure we can talk about, yeah.
I know that not all attorneys do that in estate planning. Maybe it's because I practice in the area of guardianship that I see this as a very important document. But a pre-need guardian is when a person is able to choose in advance who they would like to serve as their guardian in the event that person becomes incapacitated.
So what does a guardian do?
Okay, a guardian, there are actually different types of guardianships, first of all. There's your regular guardianship that most people think of when somebody becomes older, becomes incapacitated to dementia, or maybe even a car accident, something like that. So that's sort of a straightforward guardianship, and I'll talk about that. A guardian advocate is specifically designed for somebody who is born with developmental disabilities. Okay. So that person has to have a certain, the statute prescribes what exact types of disabilities they have to have. For example, Down syndrome, some sort of intellectual disabilities, Willie-Prater syndrome, which I don't think is as, people aren't as familiar with that. Cerebral palsy, autism. So those are some of the particular, and it has to fall within that statute. And it has to manifest itself before the age of 18, and it has to be enough of a disability where the person's not able to take care of himself or herself. That's a different type of guardianship, and the process is a little bit different because there's no need to, for the court to find that the person is incapacitated.
So if somebody finds they need these things, either because of somebody being born with certain developmental issues, or somebody's older and they no longer have capacity, they no longer are competent, then what has to happen? You need these documents beforehand, you can get them later.
Right. Well, the pre-need guardian must be signed when somebody has capacity. So somebody with a developmental disability probably
never really
doesn't
has
have
that capacity. Okay.
And most often it's a parent who's going to be the guardian of a developmentally disabled person.
And the courts would recognize that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that document is only going to be useful if somebody signs it when that person has capacity.
Who's the best person to, and this will be the question that viewers have, Wendy, is who's a good choice to be your guardian? And when you say guardian, you're talking about the person, because you also have who's responsible for your money.
Exactly.
So who should do those two roles, and how are those roles different?
Okay. First of all, if you are able to make that decision, most people are going to choose their spouse to serve as guardian of the person and guardian of the property, and it is two separate.
Okay.
And the guardianship can be plenary, which means it covers everything, or it can be a limited guardianship and only specific decisions the guardian can make. So it depends upon what happens. But in a guardianship, even if you've signed a pre-need guardian, the courts are going to take a look at that.
Still their call.
It's still the court's call because you may have chosen somebody that doesn't qualify. I mean,
or at the time, they were a good choice, and then maybe later they're not.
Is. So, true. So the courts will take that into consideration, and that's why it's important to have that document in place, but the courts are not bound by that. They have to look at the circumstances. So with a guardianship, there's a certain process that you have to follow, and it's actually two separate court cases. One is determining that there is an incapacity. If the court does not find incapacity, then they're not going to appoint a guardian, and it ends there. So you file a petition to determine incapacity, an examining committee is appointed, and it's 3 professionals who, there's a registry with the court, and depending upon what the alleged incapacity is, depends on who's going to make up that examining committee. Doctors, psychologists, registered nurses, social workers. I mean, there's a variety of people who are qualified to serve on that committee. And they each do an independent examination of the alleged incapacitated person.
Is there any type of presumptive incapacity, like a certain condition that says, hey, the court says we can waive all that?
Absolutely not.
Really? Okay.
I mean, you're talking due process rights, and somebody's rights for some of the most basic rights that we have as citizens of the United States can be taken away.
Because that's part of the process. I'm glad you made a point of that. We kind of jumped over that we are taking that person's rights away to be of their own volition, to have somebody else responsible for their person and their property.
Right. So even basic things like the right to marry, the right to vote, the right to choose with whom you socialize, the right to choose where you're going to live.
Don't tell the politicians that somebody might get the right to vote for you.
No, somebody can't vote for you, but you no longer have that right.
Still don't tell them.
So I think they know. But I mean, you're talking about taking away some very basic, very important rights. So we need to make sure that this person really is incapacitated. And it could be that they're incapacitated in a limited sense, but still can have the right to vote and have the right to make some decisions, but not all. There's a lot of nuance
to it.
There are. And so the examining committee, that 3-person committee, that's really important, because if all 3 of them say this person is totally incapacitated, it's really difficult to, not impossible, but it's difficult to fight that and object to that. And part of the due process rights, the alleged, and I keep saying alleged because this person's not incapacitated, right? The alleged incapacitated person also has a court-appointed attorney.
I see.
To make sure that his or her rights are being protected and the due process rights are being followed. And that person also has the right to an attorney of his or her own choosing if that person does not like the court-appointed attorney.
How often does this need to actually occur? You know, because if somebody's got a power of attorney, they've got their healthcare surrogate, they've got these other important estate planning documents already in place, which I know you do that, and you recommend that doing the estate planning work you do. How often does this come up if they've done these other documents?
My position is avoid having to have a guardianship if it is not necessary. It's expensive. It's 2 court cases.
It sounds like it's a lot.
You've got your determination of incapacity, and then you have the guardianship itself. And once you have a guardianship, the court is looking at everything and evaluating and making sure that everything fits in with what the law requires. That can be good if you have somebody who is being taken advantage of and not being cared for properly, but it can be unnecessary if you have your estate planning documents and there are no issues that require you to have a guardianship. I say if everything's going, you know, as they say,
working.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, incapacity doesn't mean you automatically have to have a guardianship.
Correct.
Okay. If you're incapacitated and your spouse has your power of attorney or another trusted family member or whoever else, and they're able to take care of everything and everybody's getting along and everything's fine, there's no need for guardianship.
Exactly. We usually find that when somebody is wanting to establish a guardianship, it's because somebody believes, whether it's true or not, somebody believes that the allegedly incapacitated person is being taken advantage of, is usually
They
what
need
happens.
to be protected.
Either from other people or sometimes from themselves. Right. So if you have somebody who is a threat to themselves or people around them, and I've had cases where this has happened, or you have somebody who is writing out checks for thousands of dollars to people they don't even know, or the cleaning lady, or something, you know, the neighbors, and all of a sudden the family realizes, oh my gosh, money's going out the window, where is it going? And they realize that, you know, mom or dad is not handling their finances very well. Then it's time to step in and say, okay, I think we need to do something. Okay. Another point is that there is a voluntary guardianship. Oh. That's only for guardian of the property. Okay. So if somebody is willing to, they don't need to be determined incapacitated, and they're willing to have somebody else handle their money, and they want to do it for whatever reason through a guardianship, you can do a voluntary guardianship of the property. Now, you cannot do a voluntary guardianship of the person. There has to be a court adjudication that somebody is incapacitated.
Well, with the one final question I was going to ask you, Wendy, is we, of course, have a big focus in our society and financially as well, and with estate planning, as people going into assisted living or long-term care facilities, does the person with power of attorney and healthcare surrogate have the authority to do that, or do we need a guardianship as part of that process?
Many times it's dependent upon the facility. There are some facilities that will allow you to register a, whether it's you have a developmentally disabled adult child, or you have a spouse or a mother or father who needs to be in a facility. Some facilities are okay with that. When it becomes problematic is when you have somebody who is incapacitated, has not been adjudicated incapacitated. So you say you have somebody who has dementia, Alzheimer's, and is not cooperative, sometimes becoming violent. And so there really needs to be an alternative, and the spouse or family members need to choose an alternative home, a facility, for the safety of not just the alleged incapacitated person, but other family members. Sure. And if that person is not cooperating and refuses to go, the facility can't take that person without somebody signing off, having legal ability to sign off. Okay. And if, you know, that's when some people are choosing to go with a guardianship. So if they go kicking and screaming, which is the, you know, the humorous way we talk about people going into maybe a nursing home or something else, if they literally are going in kicking and screaming, then that's when there may be a need for a guardianship. And it's a very stressful situation for the families, and the cost of having to put somebody in a facility, and on top of it, the cost of the guardianship itself, which is not inexpensive. It can be very overwhelming. Well, for a lot of people, this whole subject's overwhelming. Estate planning in general, as you know, Wendy, doing this for as long as you have, it can be complicated, but when it's all said and done, it's really an individualized situation where some of these, not just your basic documents, might be needed. So I'm really glad you could come and spend some time with us and talk about it, and we'll cover other subjects on other shows. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Wendy Mara, ladies and gentlemen, our resident estate planning expert, to help us untangle some of these different topics, including guardianships. Thank you, Wendy. You're welcome. Okay, time for viewer questions. And by the way, you remember, you can email me your questions and I can answer them right here on the program. Today's question actually comes from a reader of my financial column that appears in 2 local papers in the Volusia and Flagler County, Florida market. So today's question comes from Richard, and it's in follow-up to my column I'd written about the government won't cut up its credit card. And so the follow-up question is, and I'll kind of read it to you because it's a little long, but it's very good. Today's article was well written. Thank you, Richard, by the way, for that. But does not mention the increasing federal cost for servicing the $20 trillion debt as interest rates rise. Eventually, many federal programs will probably receive significant cuts as the amount of interest on Treasury bonds, notes, and bill increases. We already know that there will be potential cuts to federal agencies. So
Richard's question, as he went on to describe a few things, his question is, what do we do about all that? How do we deal with the fact that our government, we have a period of time during which we have amassed as a nation, as a government, and it's our country, so that means it's us, that we have amassed this debt and it's going to have to be paid for. And Richard's question, which is excellent, is what do we do about it? Now, there's obviously a lot of different ideas, and it's very political. And as you already know, this is not a political show. But I'll be candid with you. I'm an optimist. I'm an eternal optimist. I think there are ways for us to work through getting out of debt, or at least slowing it down and then working on reducing the debt. So Richard's point is spot on. If we don't do anything about our debt, interest costs will increase because every year that we borrow money to make up the difference between the revenue we take in and the expenses we pay as a country, as a government, every year that's added to the debt, and eventually it becomes difficult to pay the interest. The interest on the debt becomes a bigger and bigger portion of the total budget. So it makes it more and more difficult. My optimism comes from the fact that we've got a couple choices. Obviously, we can increase revenue to try to exceed expense. That means taxes. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's one way to do it. The other is to reduce the expenses so there's money left over to start paying down the debt, or at least stop having to borrow and adding to the debt every year. But the third choice is the one that gives me optimism, and that is that I think the way out is to grow our way out. You know, it's difficult to raise taxes. We all know that. It's a very political thing. And cutting spending is also a difficult thing because it is a political thing. Maybe a combination of revenue, reducing debt, and growing our country by doing things that are more pro-business or that stimulate the economy. And Albert Einstein is credited with a wonderful quote, and I'll read it to you. Problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. Okay, so we have to think differently. I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to presume to tell you how we will reduce the debt, but I do think that there are ways to do it, and I think it's one of those things where it's all the above. We have to work on revenue, but not looking at necessarily at raising taxes by jacking people's tax brackets up, but by having more revenue as a country from our taxpayers. And the way to do that is by growing our economy. I'm hopeful for the days ahead. Great question. Send me your question. I'll be happy to give you my thoughts and opinion on it. One more thing before you go. The government won't cut up its credit card. They're not going to do it. And we may have times when our debt increases, or maybe, hopefully, at some point it will stop increasing and we can work on trying to pay it down. But one of the things that is affected by government debt is interest rates. And so as we see interest rates go up, that could be a good thing and a bad thing. What do you do in your personal situation to make adjustments and be prepared and make the most of your financial situation, right? Well, there are things that you can look at. First, how much money do you have in the market versus in bonds, stocks versus bonds? And money that's in stocks, is it diversified enough? Are you all in one sector? Are you all in dividend-paying stocks or utilities or financial services? Those things are all affected by interest rates. And all of the market in some ways affected by interest rates. It costs more for a company to borrow and finance expansion of their company when rates go up. If they have a certain amount of debt on their balance sheet and interest rates go up and they have to refinance that, it will cost more. That means they're going to have less net income, which means less cash flow and less money available for dividends. So there's a compound effect. Don't have all your money in one place. Don't have it all in one sector. Be careful also about loading up on bonds, thinking, well, wait a minute, I don't want to be too much in the market. I'll go bunch into bonds. Be careful because as interest rates go up, bonds can go down. You don't want to have a bunch of long-term bonds and nothing shorter. The longer the bond, the more it's affected. So you can take steps. Most importantly is to pay attention to interest rates. Look at how you're allocated. Don't be afraid to hold some cash. I know it doesn't make a lot, but don't be afraid to hold cash for some security. Don't be afraid to put some money into investments that can't go down in value, that are more secure. Put those things together. You know what I'm going to say? It'll help you plan stronger.
If you would like more information about the topics and our guests featured in this series, please visit our website at PlanStrongerTV.com. Also, if you have a question you would like David to answer, please send it to questions@PlanStrongerTV.com.